Hello everyone, Bag here. Feixiao is our newest hunt carry coming in the first half of 2.5. She is a wind hunt unit with a unique ult gauge and a pretty fun playstyle, so let's waste no more time to see how to build the lacking general. First off, let's look at her kit. Feixiao's basic has nothing special about it, but her talent is the real meat of her kit. So, Feixiao has a unique ult bar that costs 6 charges to activate, although the bar can be stacked up to a total of 12 charges. Just like with Acheron, other ways of getting energy like Tingyun, Ho-Ho, or just getting hit do nothing for her. Instead, she gets an ult charge for every 2 attacks made by her team, including herself but excluding her own ultimate. So essentially, it takes 24 attacks to get her bar from empty to full, with each attack giving her half of a charge. The other part of her talent is that she has a follow-up attack that can be procced in 2 different ways, and these 2 ways are independent of each other, so using one method still means the other method will be procced as normal. The first method is, once per turn, after your allies attack, you follow up. This is the exact same as how it works with Kafka or the new Hunt March. The other method is with her skill. After she skills, she immediately follow-up attacks afterwards. Also, after she follow-up attacks, she gains a damage bonus for 2 turns, which is basically permanent since it's honestly hard for her not to constantly follow-up attack. As mentioned earlier, her ult is castable with 6 charges of her passive, in which she launches a flurry of blows against a single target. This comes in the form of 2 different moves, Bolt Sunder Blitz and War Axe Skyward. They are functionally identical moves, with one doing more damage when a target is not weakness broken, and one doing more damage if a target is weakness broken. The game will direct you on which one to use, so this can mostly just be used on autopilot. It should also be noted that Feixiao does ignore weakness type with her toughness damage during these attacks, and also, if the enemy is not weakness broken, she gains weakness break efficiency during these attacks. Finally, after these attacks, Feixiao ends her ultimate with one last final hit. While her constant follow-ups are a good portion of her damage, a large majority of her damage comes from her ultimate, so getting it very frequently is the name of the game with her kit. Her technique, first of all, looks completely insane, but it's a pretty simple battle starter that gives her an ult charge at the start of battle, while dealing damage that is guaranteed to crit. The more enemies you pull in, the more damage you do, but for endgame content you'll basically always just be pulling in one enemy, so this extra damage is mostly just for fun scenarios. Also, as a general tip, the hit that comes from entering in battle from any technique counts as a point towards her talent. So if you use, say, Payless technique, that initial hit from the technique gives half a charge, and also it will immediately proc Feixiao's follow-up attack, giving her another half charge. So essentially, entering with Feixiao's technique gives you 1.5 charges, 1 from the innate ability and half from the hit, while entering with someone else's technique gives you 1 charge, half from the hit and half from the follow-up. Lastly, her technique's damage actually happens at the start of every wave, meaning you get the AoE hit and the half charge when you transition to the next wave. For her traces, they're all pretty simple. The first one just gives her 3 charges of her ult at the start of a battle, which makes for a total of 4.5 when combined with entering combat with her technique. The second part of her trace makes it so that if Feixiao did not proc her follow-up through her talent, which is via having an ally attack an enemy, she still gains half a charge towards her ult. This makes it so that even if you miss that follow-up, which is very possible if you advance her action with Bronya or Sparkle, she still gains the ult charge that the follow-up would have produced regardless. But doing this is still a decent damage loss for her, since the follow-ups are a decent part of her damage over the course of a fight. Her second trace makes her ult damage count as follow-up damage. This is like the exact same as Mose's trace, which we covered last time, meaning that this mostly just matters for gearing, but it also does have some niche uses like pushing forward Numby or giving a Venture in a passive stack. The second part of this trace also makes her follow-ups deal more crit damage, so hey, there's some immediate use of that new scaling. Finally, her last trace makes it so that when you skill, you get an attack buff for 3 turns, which continues the trend of her just having buffs in her kit that are essentially or literally permanent, meaning that as a baseline she does very nice damage. For her minor traces, she gets attack percent, crit rate, and defense. For her talent priority, as a carry, you really should level everything besides her basic, but going by where her damage is coming from, you should level her ult, then her talent, then her skill, before finally maybe doing her basic if you have a team where you need to use it, which we'll be getting to shortly. Finally, let's very quickly go through her Eidolons. Her first one is a minor damage buff that makes her ult do more damage. This is overall about a 10% damage buff, which I would really not recommend to go on its own as she has better initial options for vertical investment, which we will go into later. Her second Eidolon is her best stopping point if you do go for them, making it so that every time an ally uses a follow-up, they contribute an entire charge to her talent rather than the normal half of the charge. This means that depending on her team, she can get her ultimate up insanely fast. While there is no direct damage buff with this Eidolon, you will be doing a lot more damage through faster ult rotations. It's definitely on the strong end of the normal E2. E3 is just ultimate and basic leveling, which is a minor increase. Her E4 is weird. It increases her toughness reduction from her follow-up by 100%, while also giving her another essentially permanent 8% speed buff. These are nice to have, but are mostly worthless for something as expensive as an E4. Her E5 is skill and talent damage, which is an even smaller increase than her E3. And finally, her E6 is a res pen buff on her ult, while making her follow-up be considered as ultimate damage as well, while then also increasing the multiplier of her follow-up by 140%. It's a typical E6 that just gives a truck ton more damage. Obviously, this is not recommended for people to pull for, but if you are crazy enough to go for it, rest assured that it is a sizable damage amp. Again, I would generally not recommend going for her Eidolons, as she has better investment options elsewhere, but at the very least her E2 is pretty good if you want to go for it. For light cones, rest assured that she is a carry in which her signature is not so much better than her other options, to where it feels terrible not to use it. I venture forth to hunt is her best option, but compared to free-to-play options, it's only about a 15% damage increase. Luckily, Ratio and Topaz's light cones are almost interchangeable for her as alternatives to her signature, only being a bit off in terms of damage. So if you already have one of them, I definitely would not recommend going for her signature, and instead you can just give her one of those. Seelay's light cone can also be slightly better than her free options if you build her with speed boots, which is usually what you want to do, but it's an incremental improvement that is overall not that important to consider if you don't already have it. Her best free-to-play option is Swordplay. Yes, it is slightly better than Cruising, assuming that you don't reset Swordplay's passive too frequently. If you don't have an S5 Swordplay, Cruising is a tiny bit better, so it's definitely not bad to use as an entirely free option. Gearing is pretty simple in all honesty. Her best relic set is the Valoris set, as its huge 36% ult damage bonus coupled with the 6% crit rate is just uncontested in the sheer numbers it gives her. However, Duke is not far behind at all, so if you already have a farmed Duke set, it might just come down to how satisfied you are with its substats, and if you're not satisfied, you can farm Valoris for incremental gains. Besides those two sets, it comes down to mixing Duke with 2-piece attack sets, mixing 2-piece attack sets together, or running the Quantum set, which is the gold standard of not the best option but universal enough to where you probably have a set of it built. For planers, this is another case of the top options being very close to each other, meaning that the deciding factor will likely come down to your substats of what you already have. Duran, Izumo, and Salcedo are all incredibly close, and although Duran is the best one here damage-wise, Izumo and Salcedo, given crit rate, means that they are slightly easier to build with, as crit rate is generally the more desirable stat over crit damage until you have a high enough crit rate. So while I am obligated to say that overall farming Valoris and Duran is the smartest option for her, their respective competition is close enough where I can say that whatever option makes the most amount of sense for your account to farm, choose that option and you'll be fine. For main stats, you obviously want a crit body, with whatever helps you get to the preferred 1-to-2 ratio. Probably being crit rate unless if you have some really cracked substats. Her minor traces, signature, Valoris, and Salcedo or Izumo all give crit rate, so if you do get enough with their help, then crit damage might be better. In the end, it's all about having that good 1-to-2 ratio. For boots, speed is generally better, as while you are losing a decent amount of damage, getting more turns means getting more ultimates, which more than makes up for the lower damage numbers. Finally, the rope and sphere are pretty simple. Damage percent is slightly better than attack on the sphere, but substats are ultimately the difference maker. And well, she doesn't use energy normally, so an ER rope would be useless on her, duh. Okay, now we are getting into the thick of things, as her team comps are the make or break factor for her in terms of competing with the best of the best carries. For Feixiao, Eidolons and signatures don't matter nearly as much as getting the right team for her, so let's go over each slot individually. After Feixiao herself, the first unit on the team is the sub DPS. And this is where you have a good amount of flexibility. While Topaz is generally her best option, even at E0S0, March and Mose are not that far behind and are definitely usable. Essentially, how it goes is that Topaz is the strongest, followed closely by E6 Mose, who is followed by a general tie between E2 to E4 Mose with the free E6 March, which is then followed by an E0 Mose. So just use whoever you have the most built, but March is a fine option, especially for being free. Next, we get to the buffer. You probably already know this, but Robin is by far her most important support as a carry. And in my opinion, Feixiao's reliance on Robin is her greatest weakness as a unit. Now let me be clear, Feixiao does still work without Robin, but having her versus not having her is a notable difference to say the least. The general polling priority for Feixiao goes like this. First you get Feixiao herself, then Robin E1, and then Feixiao S1. Robin S1 is not entirely needed, as Robin most likely won't struggle with energy in a Feixiao team, but it is still a nice pickup for the account in general. With all that being said, her team at entirely E0S0 is more than enough to clear endgame content, so please don't spend more than you want to. If you haven't saved for Robin, don't worry, there are alternatives. Before going to the next unit, I'd like to go over a general Feixiao tip that is the most relevant with Robin, which is that you should be ulting with Feixiao when all of your buffs are up. Unlike with Acheron, you have a lot of leeway in terms of storing energy before you start to overcap. So if you can wait to get stuff like Proof of Debt, Mose's debuffs, or Robin's ult, this will greatly increase your damage. Generally, slightly overcapping is worth it in order to be within something like Robin's ult, but make sure your team rotation doesn't consistently overcap, as you don't want to waste too many ult charges. Getting back to things, Bronya is the next best buffer, providing large damage buffs for her ult as well as making Feixiao hit a very large amount of follow-ups. In this, while a -1 speed Bronya is the best way to use her here, you want a way to proc Feixiao's follow-up from an ally attacking before bringing her next turn up, so having someone in between them in the turn order is a good bet. Also, since Bronya is so SP intensive, March and Topaz are probably better than Mose here, since Mose is SP neutral, while March is uber SP positive and Topaz can be SP positive with some concessions. You may even need to use Feixiao's basic every now and again, which is a net loss in damage and ult charging, but disrupting the flow of a -1 speed Bronya can be very hard to recover from, so do what needs to be done to manage your SP efficiently. Sparkle is not far behind Bronya, by the way. You get less turns but better buffs and SP management, but Bronya is the more accessible option while still being generally better as well, so Sparkle is only here for that niche team building scenario in which Bronya is busy elsewhere. Lastly, for this slot, you can actually run a triple damage dealer comp, running 2 of the 3 out of the previously discussed sub DPSs. This is generally worse than using Bronya or Sparkle, but it is pretty fun to see the chain reactions of follow-ups go off one after another. Lastly, for her sustain, Aventurine is the general best option, with his single target debuff fitting her hunt playstyle very nicely, and his myriad of follow-up attacks funneling ult charges for her better than any other sustain option can hope for. The new Ling Sha also has a decent amount of follow-ups, but with no relevant buffs, her performance is sizably worse than Aventurine for Feixiao. Every other meta sustain is pretty interchangeable with their benefits. Gallagher provides notable stacking generation and SP, Fushuan provides great damage buffs to the entire team including all of the sub DPSs, while Huohuo provides attack for everyone and energy for everyone besides Feixiao, but even then that energy can still shorten some ult rotations. And Luocha is there. I guess he can attack a lot for some stacks? Sure. It should be noted that her best team of Topaz, Robin, and Aventurine, which yes, this team is being called Fart, but I won't be saying that ever again if I can help it, is one of the highest performing teams in the game outright. But her baseline for lower investment when you don't have this pretty premium team is noticeably worse than someone like Boothill. If you are wanting to purely pull for your account strength, I would recommend to get Robin before Feixiao. As while both of them are amazing, Robin provides more account utility than Feixiao could when used without her. That lower baseline, despite being noticeably worse than her best teams, is still for sure viable. In the end, it's the difference between easily 0 cycling and easily 1 to 3 cycling. So unless if you really just care about that stuff, just pull for Feixiao. She's incredibly fun and strong in her own right. So that's Feixiao. While I personally won't be getting her, I still think she looks very fun, and I wish everyone going for her gets her on your first 10 pull. Make sure to subscribe for more guides and meta content and watch my other vids. Bye!